Just getting things set up on the
Hello
YouTube
there.
stream.
Thank you for your invitation.
I like your glasses, Robert. This is Charlene.
Hi, Charlene. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
It's a great blue.
Chat out.
They are.
With your white hair and blue glasses, you're almost a flag of Israel.
Matter of fact, I had never thought about it. You may have something there.
Okay, technology is up and distributed. So now I can get this next button to do this. And then hit present. And why didn't it go to full screen?
Where'd it go?
It's supposed to present full screen, but it decided not to. Let's see. That looks better. You can see that all right?
Well, now we have slide 1, mine.
Sorry, what?
Okay, now it's gone. It's gone now.
Okay, so you can just see the title, right? I'll take that as a yes. And that's going to do it every time I move. That's kind of annoying. Just a second. Why is it doing this all of a sudden? What happens if I do it the other way around? It's still being difficult. Give me a minute to try something here. Let me just see if I can't make this look the way it's supposed to look. That's better. Okay. So now let us try that. Look better? Not hearing any complaints, so I guess that's working better than it was. So we've given our usual buffer zone to give people time to sort out their technology and anything else that might be keeping them from logging in. Hopefully you're in either in YouTube or in the Zoom live. If you're on YouTube, then that means you're getting a slight delayed version. Please feel free to use the Zoom link and join us live. It makes it much easier for you to unmute and ask questions or give comments. If you do want to ask a question or give a comment through YouTube, please use the chat and I'll be happy to find it. It may take me a second to notice. And of course, you'll be a few seconds behind the class feed. So for tonight, for our Pathway to Judaism, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do first before we dive in. As I mentioned last week, this is the last week before I go on my vacation, which means for the next 4 weeks, there will not be class. You're welcome to peruse the back catalog and catch up on any episodes you might have missed. But we will not be having class for 4 weeks. There will be emails and updates sometime before I come back to make sure that you know when I'm coming back, and to make sure you know how we'll be continuing the class at that time, depending upon the health circumstances in Central Florida. Certainly for those of you who aren't in Central Florida, don't worry. We still live broadcast this no matter what. The question is only whether we are going to have classes in person in addition to the live broadcast, or whether it will remain 100% virtual like we've got. With that housekeeping done, it is time for our class tonight, which is on money. Not money per se, but how we use money. It may surprise you to know that if you take all of the laws of keeping kosher and you stack them up against all of the laws of how we are meant to handle ourselves in our business and other financial transactions, you will find about 3 to 1 in terms of the laws that cover our commercial activity compared to covering what we eat. Keeping kosher is incredibly simple compared to keeping oneself within the boundaries of the law when it comes to business. This is because, of course, keeping kosher is a rather simple proposition to begin with. You can go back to some of the earlier classes when we talked about that in a bit more detail. It's also because doing anything financially is going to touch on a huge range of other people's lives, and there is usually a self-interest that makes it easy to convince yourself that what you're doing is right. And so to continue to be on the right path, to continue to guide yourself in the right direction, you need a lot more assistance on making sure you're pointed in that direction. Now, what we're going to talk about tonight are just a broad sampling of the laws covering how we handle ourselves in commercial and financial dealings. There is a lot more to be said about each and every one of the topics that I'm going to touch on tonight. But I wanted to give you just a sampling of the range of things and some of the core principles from them, so that you at least have a basic idea of how we approach these. And then if you have particular questions, you can ask tonight, and I'll do my best to answer in short order. If they are more detailed, then I may have to say that's going to need a longer discussion. So without any more introduction, let's move in. Basic business. Well, from the Torah, we get a collection of some very straightforward rules, or at least that sound straightforward, for how we're meant to handle ourselves. First and foremost, the very famous and ever popular, don't steal. This may not sound like a business rule. It certainly seems more like a criminal code in the parlance of the modern world. But in fact, this is a business proposition as well. If you engage in business where you take from someone else unlawfully, even if it is done with pen and paper rather than with pistol or knife, that is still considered theft. And stealing in any form is always considered wrong. What counts as stealing in business, that we'll have to get into in more detail. You can see that Leviticus expands a little bit to draw our attention to this. Do not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. Do not swear by my name falsely, so that you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired servant shall not remain with you shall remain with you all night until the morning. All right, so there's a number of different aspects here that I need to expand on before we get into the rest of the class. Dealing falsely and lying to one another, of course, this is one of the hallmarks of bad business and of cheating. Do not swear by my name falsely may seem out of place to those of us in the modern world. However, that is because in the modern world, we have a very strict evidentiary rule system for our cases. You need to, and usually can, produce different documents and different pieces of evidence to establish your case in a civil matter. In the ancient world, there usually were not such reliable elements. If you had witnesses, that was great. If you had a document, that was also good. But people also often would not have either of those, which meant that you often had to live by someone's word. If they said they had done X and there was no proof to the contrary, then oftentimes, under certain circumstances, we would need to believe them. But in order to give them more impetus to be honest rather than lying casually, we did make them in certain cases swear that what they were saying was true by God's name. This was meant as an added incentive to prevent people from lying. And the additional phrase, I am the Lord, is reminding us that even if you can swear falsely and even if you can get away with it in front of the court, you're not actually fooling God. And that means that there is going to be eventually a reckoning of accounts, whether it be in this world or the next, for doing something falsely. Oppressing your neighbor may sound like something that is only done by those who wield violence. But as we'll see, this idea of oppression is extended to how people deal with each other in financial dealings as well. And one specific example that often would come up in the ancient world, and still to this day, was the holding back of wages of somebody who you had hired to do work. Many people who were the most vulnerable in society would hire themselves out as day laborers. And that meant that day by day, they were making their money, and they would be working for the day. You could pay them at night, and they would go and buy food, and that was how they would survive. If you didn't pay them, they didn't eat that day. And so keeping their salary back from them, even by a night from when it was promised, would be to cause them harm. And then one more also from Leviticus, from Vayikra. And if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy of your neighbor's hand, you shall not wrong one another. This is again a reminder that all of our buying and selling has to be done with great scrupulous care to make sure that it is done correctly. All right, any questions quickly before we move on to some examples of how these different commandments get put into practice in Jewish law? Okay. Hello, there we go. So buying is sort of the basis for just about all transactions, but it's important to understand that according to Jewish law, and many of these texts are taken here from Rambam's Mishnah Torah summary, because he writes so clearly, that buying is not just a simple act. I know for most of us, we take buying for granted. You go into the store, you give them money, you take the item, you go home. And if I had to ask you, when did the item become yours? We might have to debate about that a little bit. Well, Judaism debated about this a few thousand years ago, and this is how Judaism has resolved the question of when do you actually buy? An item is not acquired merely through a verbal agreement. This applies even when witnesses testify that the people have reached an agreement. So if I say to you, I'm going to buy your horse and I'm going to give you 100 shekels for it. And you say, great, I'm going to sell you my horse and I'll take the 100 shekels. If you've only spoken, even in front of witnesses, you have not actually concluded the deal. What is implied? A person says, I am selling you this house, I'm selling you this wine, a price is fixed. The purchaser agrees and says, I have purchased it. The seller agrees and says, I have sold it. And they tell witnesses, serve as witnesses that so-and-so has sold and so-and-so has purchased. Their words are of no consequence. That's not entirely true, as we'll see, but as far as the buck stops here legal consequence, nothing has occurred. It is as if they have never spoken to each other at all. The same applies with regard to a person who gives a gift and its recipient. The idea being that if you promise to give someone a gift and they say, wow, that's so great, and you even have witnesses saying that a gift is going to be given, that doesn't actually matter until the gift is given. If a purchaser, and one of the reasons why this is important, if a purchaser paid for an article and it was destroyed by forces beyond his control before he took it, the purchaser may tell the seller, give me the article I purchased or return my money. Even though there are witnesses who saw that the article was destroyed by forces beyond control, the seller could not save it, and he was not lazy regarding the matter, the seller must return the money. For our sages ordained that a kinyan, a purchase, a buying, an acquisition, is finalized through pulling. In order to purchase, you need to actually take physical possession and move it into your sphere of ownership, into your domain. So for example, if I were to buy a car and I were to have given the money to the car dealer and I say, great, I'll be back in an hour to pick it up because, I need someone to drive my other car home. In that hour, if a tree falls and crushes the car, it is not my loss, it is the loss of the car dealership according to Jewish law. Even though it is technically my car, because I have not taken possession of it, it means that it is still in the ownership realm of the car dealer, and therefore I can ask for my money back or ask for a car that is equivalent to the one that has been destroyed. That is something that is often missed when people don't quite realize that purchasing doesn't just mean an agreement. Purchasing doesn't just mean giving something. Purchasing means actually taking. It has to be acquired by the person who now has it. Any questions on that point? Okay. But what happens if you're not quite the most trustworthy person when it comes to these deals? I don't mean that you cheat. I don't mean that you don't come up with the money, but you change your mind a lot. You're fickle. Whenever a person pays money but does not perform pulling on the produce or any other item, although the purchaser does not acquire the movable property, as we have explained, the person who retracts, whether the purchaser or the seller, is considered not to have conducted himself in a Jewish manner. Even if the purchaser only made a deposit, if either of the parties involved retracts, that party is eligible to receive the title of Misha Para. So that means like a reneger. The issue here is that if you make an agreement, in modern parlance, we'd say you did the deal, even though the transaction has not been finished by the acquiring, if you back out of it at that point, legally you are within your right to back out of it. It is technically not done until you acquire it physically. But for a person to do that within a community is going to create this negative reputation that they are a person who cannot be relied upon to finalize the deal. Now, my car example may not be such a big issue, but if you have some different issue where you say to somebody, oh yes, I'd like to buy 100 barrels of wine from you. And the person says, great, I'll have the 100 barrels shipped from my vineyard down to the town. And then the wine gets there and you say, never mind. Technically, legally, yes, you are allowed to do that. But Jewishly, ethically, morally, it is not the way to behave. Certainly if there are extenuating circumstances, your money was all swept out to the sea or whatever, then it's understandable. But this is talking about a case where you simply changed your mind after having agreed. If you are going to make an agreement, you should think carefully before you make the agreement, not afterwards. Because once the agreement was made, both buyer and seller should not renege. If they do, legally they are allowed to, but they will earn this approbation, they will earn this title from the community of somebody that is a reneger. But they, the sages say, the one who exacted payment, Misha Para, from the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersion, will ultimately exact payment from he who does not stand by his word. Right? So yes, the court cannot prosecute, but that doesn't mean that God forgets. God notices that you made a deal, you made a commitment, and then you chose to back out of it of your own free will. And that's not right. That's not right. On that same topic, when a person agrees to a transaction with a verbal commitment alone, it is appropriate for him to keep his word, even though he did not take any money at all, did not make a mark on the article he desired to purchase, nor leave security. Even if you didn't do anything tangible, if you made the verbal commitment, you should follow through. If either the seller or the purchaser retracts, although they are not liable to receive the adjuration reneger, they are considered to be faithless, and the spirit of the sages does not derive satisfaction from them. So first and foremost, you have to be honest in how you engage in your deals. If you are making a transaction, if you are making an agreement with someone, you should do everything in your power to follow through. And if you're not prepared for that, then you shouldn't make the deal under those current circumstances, but wait until you are confident that you will be able to fulfill your part of the vow. Questions or comments on this aspect? I'll just say a little more while I wait for people to decide if they have the courage to comment or question. It is often forgotten in the modern world how important, up until very recently, your personal reputation was within a community. If you became known as somebody who would routinely violate their agreements, even without breaking the law, you would find it very hard to get new people to make agreements with you. You would find it very hard to get new people to trust you. So having a good reputation, a good name within a community meant that you should be very careful when making commitments that they were commitments you were willing to stand by. Last call for questions or comments before moving on. Okay. Oh, what happened to my mouse? Hello. There we go. Regarding gifts, similarly, if a person promised to give a colleague a gift and failed to do so, he is considered to be faithless. When does the above apply? With regard to a small gift, because the recipient will depend on the promise that he was given. With regards to a large gift, by contrast, the giver is not considered to be faithless if he retracts, because the recipient does not believe that he will give him these articles until he transfers ownership through a formal kinyan, through a formal act of acquiring. So this sounds opposite, I think, for most people at first read. Usually you would think that if you broke the promise that you were going to give someone a huge gift, I'm going to give you a house, I'm going to give you a car, I'm going to pay for your college, you might think that breaking a big promise would be the worst promise, the worst transgression. But no, because no one believes that that promise of a gift is really going to happen until they see it. Right? I'm not going to actually think that you're really going to give me a house until you hand me the key. I'm not really going to believe that you're going to pay for my college until you have actually written the check. But a small gift, if you tell me that you're going to buy the tickets for the concert, if you tell me that you're going to bring the meat for the barbecue on Sunday, then yeah, I'm actually counting on you to buy those tickets. I'm counting on you to bring the meat for the barbecue. And if you don't, if you decide not to, then I'm actually going to have some loss. I will have made plans, I will have arranged guests, I will have done other things that I am now going to have some level of damage in losing out on my time, losing out on my status by the community or my friends. There will be harm done because I was counting on you. I don't count on you for the big stuff, but I do count on you to do the things that I know are in your power. And if you don't do them, then I really will be hurt by your reneging. Again, you can't take the person to court for that, but you can absolutely tut and say that this is not the Jewish way to behave. Excuse me, mouse is still acting up. There we go. So I mentioned before this idea of oppressing people in buying and selling and oppressing one's neighbor. Well, what is meant by that is the following. Whether one overreaches, meaning oppression by the other translation, knowingly or is not aware that any fraud, ona'ah, in the sale, he is held liable. All right, so what do we mean by fraud? Right? In modern English, if you wanted to prove fraud, you would have to prove a deliberate attempt to deceive. You would have to prove that there was a deliberate attempt to either misrepresent the item or to misvalue the item during the transaction. That is not quite what it means in Jewish law. How much does overreaching have to be in order that he will have to repay it? Meaning that there is a requirement that you will pay the difference between the real price, the real value, and what was transacted. 1/6 of the value of the item is fraud, in which the exchange is valid, but the defrauder has to pay the entire difference to the cheated person. So if I go to buy something that should be $100, but instead 1/6 of 100, I should have done something. If I go to buy something that is $60 and instead you charge me $70, then I can demand, once I find the true value, that you give me back my $10 of overpayment. that 1/6, if it's less than a 6, if I pay 69, that's considered fair as the price of doing business. But once it goes above that, then it is not. And yes, the rabbis did consider the price of doing business as being perfectly fine, and profit was fine, but profit had to be held to within a reasonable margin, or else it was considered exploitation and oppression, that this was ona'ah. This was a abuse of other people in the community. You will notice, however, that this is protecting both the buyer and the seller. If the buyer knowingly underpays, that they are able to, for some reason, convince the seller that they can purchase the price for less than what it should be sold for, then they too are considered to have committed a transgression. And when the buyer finds out the truth, they can take them to court and receive the difference between that. If the overreaching is less than that, the defrauder, does not have to repay anything, because it is normal practice to waive the right to frauds amounting to less than that. If the overreaching amounts to anything more than a 6, so I had to pay $71 for my $60 item, the exchange is void, right? No purchase actually took place. It was a complete 100% fraudulent act. And the cheated person may return the article and not buy it at all. I find out that that happened. I can walk back to you. I can hand it back to you and say, give me my $71. I'm taking my business elsewhere. Done. If it's 70, it's at that 1/6 margin, then I can demand the $10 back, but I do need to keep the item. If it's more than that, the action is void. The cheater, however, may not retract if the cheated person wishes the exchange to stand. So if the person who bought it for 71 is okay, and the person who sold it for 71 suddenly realizes, you know what, I probably could have sold it to him or another sucker for more. No, go ahead and cancel it. It's I should tell you I was wrong. It isn't worth that much. This should be a fraudulent sale. It should be canceled and nullified. Just go ahead and give me back. I'll give you your money. Nope. If I want to keep it for the price I paid, I can actually keep it. And so too for the seller. If the seller realizes that he was cheated but is okay with those terms, he can tell the person to keep it, that he's not taking it back. We good? Hearing no objection, moving on. But there are other ways to cheat that don't have anything to do with the price itself. And in this particular case, we're going to look at cheating through the quantity of what you are selling. If one sells commodities to another by measure or by weight or by number, I'm selling you a gallon, I'm selling you a pound, I'm selling you a dozen, and has made even the slightest error, the difference must always be returned, because the laws of overreaching apply only to errors in value, while in errors in quantity, the difference must be returned. If I say I'm selling you a dozen eggs and you open it up and there are 11 eggs, I must give you 12 eggs. I must give you another egg to complete it. It doesn't matter whether we're still in the measure of 1/6 value in which the transaction would stand. If I say I'm selling you 100 jelly beans and I miss it by 1, I need to make up that extra jelly bean, and vice versa. If I say I'm selling you a dozen eggs and you open up the box and there are 13, then you have to return that 13th egg to me. Thus, Rambam points out, if one has sold to another 100 nuts for a dinar and has found that there are 101 or 99, again, either direction is an issue, the transaction is valid, but the amount of the error must be returned to the aggrieved party. So too, if one has sold something and a defect of which the purchaser was unaware is found on the purchased item, the purchaser may return the article even after the lapse of many years, because this was a transaction in error. If I bought something thinking that it was mint condition and it turns out that it is corroded inside, if I discover that 2 years down the road and it's clear that it must have been corroded when I purchased it, I can absolutely still go back to the seller and say, hey, you sold me something that was corroded, not mint condition. This was an error. Give me my money back. How are people handling this? Does it seem a little stricter than what most people are used to dealing with in the modern society? Most of us buy and forget, sell and forget, but not according to Jewish law. And I should point out, not according to most classical legal systems. Most communities that had communities forced people to stand by what they were buying and selling in order that the community could stand to continue to do their transactions. Was there a question or comment? So just one little question from me to you. You can answer either in your head or chime in. How many people here remember knowing the names of the people in the shops where you shopped? Knowing the grocer, knowing the butcher, knowing the person where you got your clothes dry cleaned, and knowing that if there was a mistake, they would definitely make it right. And knowing that if you made a mistake, that you would want to make it right to them. That used to be the norm. Even when I was growing up, and I'm not exactly a spring chicken, but I'm also not the oldest person in the world. Even when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, it was still normal to know the people who were the shopkeepers, and the shopkeepers knew who their customers were. Nowadays, it's much harder to find that level of connection and familiarity. And that's unfortunate. But let's continue this idea of quality. When a person exchanged one article for another or one animal for another, the laws of ona'ah, of this abuse, do not apply. This is true even when he exchanges a needle for a necklace or a lamb for a donkey. The person may desire the needle more than the necklace. Right, so when we are appraising value, when we're using money, then we can appraise a fixed amount. But if we are doing a trade, then there is no fixed value to this item and that item for every person. I may need a donkey more than I need a lamb. I may need a lamb more than I need a donkey. And I may need that needle more than a necklace. If I sell the necklace, then it has to follow the rules. If I sell the needle, it has to follow the rules. But if we're just trading, then we can trade whatever we want because there's no way to value the individual need of that particular purchase. When, however, the person exchanges produce for produce, the laws of ona'ah do apply, whether the produce is evaluated before the sale or after the sale. Fruits, vegetables, grains, these things were all considered to be commodities in the modern sense of the term. They were almost like currency, and there would be set prices for certain qualities of different types of produce, and thus it was considered to be a exchangeable, a negotiable currency, and you had to follow the rules of the set value. Right? And a good apple is a good apple. It doesn't really matter how much you need it. It's just a good apple, and it has to follow the scale of what the prices are for that type of food. Although a person tells a colleague, we are completing this transaction on the condition that you do not hold me responsible for the unfair gain, the laws of ona'ah apply. Right? You cannot waive your equivalent of constitutional right in Judaism. Right? I can't tell you, go ahead, cheat me, it's okay. Let me sign the paper saying that cheating me is okay. Even if I signed it, even if I do that, I can still take you to court, and showing me a piece of paper that says, but you said it was okay, will not stand up in court. This also applies, by the way, in Jewish law for personal injury. If I sign a piece of paper that says it's okay for you to break my hand, that does not mean you will not be prosecuted for breaking my hand. However, there is a qualification for this. When does the above apply? When the statements are made without being explicit. In such an instance, the other party does not know how much money he is foregoing in favor of his colleague. If, however, one explicitly mentions the amount of unfair gain, the laws of ona'ah do not apply, because all conditions that are accepted by both parties are binding in cases of financial law. So different than breaking my hand, if I actually spell out, I am cheating you by 53%, which means you are losing $400, and you say, I understand I'm losing $400 and that you are cheating me by 53%, then yes, that will stand up in a court as a final transaction. If I just tell you, I'm cheating you, but I'm not going to tell you how much, that will not stand up, even if I agreed to it, because I didn't know how much I was losing. Does that make sense to everyone? I know it's so hard when I can't see all the faces. Judaism had a great many regulations and still do, although generally we follow the civil law of the local authorities in any country that we live in. But we learn these laws to make sure that we are still being as scrupulous as we need to be. The court is obligated to regulate prices and appoint officers of the law so that people at large will not be able to reap whatever profit they desire. Instead, the court should regulate that a person should earn only a profit of a sixth. A seller should not profit more than a sixth of his investment. That was considered to be a fair amount of profit, and anything more than that would have only been earned through some form of exploitation, either of dealing dishonestly or of duping or of taking advantage of someone's unequal situation and thereby extorting more from them than really what the product or service was worth. When does the above apply? With regard to articles on which our lives depend, wine, oil, fine flour. With regards to herbs, costus, frankincense, and the like, by contrast, a set limit is not established by the court. The seller may take any measure of profit he desires. Right? The court was there to protect that people would still be able to get the basics of life, not their luxuries. Meaning that if you were selling things that were wonderful and attractive and amazing, like spices were in the ancient world, that was fine. And you could gouge whatever price you wanted, because if I couldn't afford your frankincense, it wasn't like my life was over. If I can't afford flour, if I can't afford oil, then I would have a great deal of difficulty in living. So there were different categories of essential and non-essentials, and the non-essentials were not as heavily regulated. Looks like Loretta is saying that, yes, people don't follow the idea of having the connection and knowing people as much nowadays as they used to. And Judaism has a built-in warranty, better even than the one your credit card tries to give you. Whenever there is a blemish that the people of a city agree is serious enough to warrant the nullification of a transaction, the article should be returned. Meaning that if people considered this to be an issue, then it was an issue. Whenever the people agree that the fault is not considered to be a blemish, the article should not be returned unless the purchaser explicitly stated that he refused to accept even the slightest blemish. The rationale is that whenever a person conducts business without making any specific demands, it is assumed that he is following prevailing customs of the community. Right? The rabbis were very big on having communities follow their own customs within the laws of Torah, so that people would feel the normal connection to each other and be following the same set of rules and the same set of guidelines that went around the rules to help smooth things out. So if I buy a car and I get it home and I notice that there is a smudge on the window, most people are not going to demand a new car because there's a smudge on the window. On the other hand, if I get home and I find out that there's a huge scratch down the side of the car, most people would consider that to have been a problem, such that I would not have bought the car for the price I paid had that been clearly pointed out to me at the time.
Oh, I
Whenever,
have a question.
Yes.
Because I'm just here thinking, and this may be a sidetrack. I remember the story of Fiddler on the Roof, that he talks about the mule that purchased it, and then it turned out that it was a different age, that the buyer was told. Will the buyer have the right to get a different mule, or what will have happened? Because in the case of the Fiddler on the Roof, the way that they presented is that they still had that argument that they never resolved it.
So, that was one of the things that in that movie was very, very funny for someone who knows Jewish law, is that they had a very interesting case, which both sides should have gone to the Beit Din, should have gone to the court. And if one was able to prove that the donkey actually was incorrect, then absolutely he would be able to get the transaction overturned. And if the other could prove that no, everything was done fine and on the up and up, then the transaction would not have been overturned. But to still be arguing about it years later implies that they never went to the court. They never actually got a resolution. They never got a ruling. But I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have already had a ruling on this. That could have been settled years ago. Now, the one thing that they might have been hinting at, which is more about the human side of a community rather than the legal side, is they might have gone to the court and it might have been decided in the favor of one of them, but the other one still disagrees with that ruling, even though they had to live by it. And so they are still complaining about the issue without having accepted what the court's ruling was. And unfortunately, that is the price of being human, which is that we have beautiful laws which give wonderful structure that can create a harmonious community. And even if we are compelled to follow them, that doesn't mean we can compel the heart to truly accept those rulings when it goes against our interest, which may be how that scene was meant to be interpreted.
Thanks.
So continuing on the idea of warranties, whenever a person purchases an article without making any specific statements, it is assumed that he desired to purchase an article that is perfect, without any blemish, right? If I go into the shop, I don't have to say, I want to buy the shirt that doesn't have a missing button. It's assumed that I want to buy a shirt that is fine. Even if the seller explicitly said, this article is sold to you on the condition that you do not return it as blemished, the purchaser may nevertheless return the article unless the purchaser says, I accept any blemish that I will discover in this article, although it causes it to be worth such and such less. For when a person waives money that is due him, he must know how much he is waiving and make an explicit statement to that effect, as applies with regard to the laws of ona'ah, of taking advantage of someone. So yes, I can waive it, but I have to say exactly what I am giving up. If I just buy the shirt, even if you say sold as is, that doesn't work under Jewish law. It's only sold as is if you can tell me how it is and what I'm actually giving up by buying it. Because that it has to be a level of honesty and transparency that again is not required under American law. So let's talk more about the direct forms of depriving someone of their money or goods, which is called theft. Whenever a person steals something worth more than a pruta, that was like a penny in the ancient world, he has sinned. He must repay. The Torah prohibits stealing even the smallest amount. It is forbidden to steal as a joke, planning to return it, or pay. All is forbidden in case you get used to such behavior. So if you think, oh, I'm gonna take my friend's car and move it and he'll be crazy for a day and then I'll tell him where it is. No, that is not appropriate, right? Even if you said, but it was a joke, I wasn't planning to keep it, you still should not take someone else's property without their permission, period. No excuses, no exceptions. Sorry, I should point out, yes, in the case of life, if you think somebody is drunk, you can definitely take their car keys so they can't drive home if you think that they would be a danger to themselves and others. But barring life and death circumstances, we don't take anyone else's property without their permission. What is a thief? One who takes someone's money secretly without the knowledge of the owner, such as one who puts his hand into his neighbor's bag and takes money without the owner seeing it, and similar cases. But if he takes it openly and publicly by force, he is considered not a thief, but a robber. And indeed, we have these same distinctions in American law, that robbery and theft are two different types of crime. Thievery is with stealth, and robbery is usually with violence or threat of violence. When convicted, in either case, he must pay twice the amount stolen or its worth, meaning that if I stole something and sold it, I have to pay double what it was worth if I don't have the item anymore. If he returns the property without being convicted, he pays no additional fines. This is based off Exodus 22. So the idea here is that What we actually want is when someone has stolen to say, I was wrong to steal. This was bad. And then to return the item or return the money. It's only when they are forced to go through a court case, having denied what they did, that they are then forced to pay an additional penalty. So the ultimate goal is to return the lost property to the person from which it was taken. And then the penalty is put on top only if we didn't get that from the goodness of their heart of having returned, done tshuva to the right path. Theft is considered very problematic in Judaism and much to be avoided. Anyone who steals so much as a pruta from someone else is as though he has taken away his life. As it is said, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, that thus take away the life of the owners, from the book of Proverbs. And also, and he shall eat up your harvest and your bread that your sons and daughters should eat, from Jeremiah, implying that if you take someone's food, they will starve. And further, for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land, from Joel, and it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. Now, from 2 Samuel, it says he slew the Gibeonites, but the Talmud asks, so where do we find that Saul killed the Gibeonites, right? It doesn't actually say that he killed them. Since he killed Nob, the city of the priests that would provide them with water and food, Scripture regards him as though he had personally killed them. Because he killed those who provided for them, that meant that he had taken from them the food that they would need. And so therefore, it was considered to be as though he killed the Gibeonites directly, right? To take from a person in a way that will leave them with no means of support is no different than putting a gun against their head and pulling the trigger, right? Death by finances is just as bad as death by violence. There's no distinction in Jewish law between, white collar crime and blue collar crime. Judaism doesn't really consider that. Doing your crimes with a pen and paper doesn't somehow make you cleaner than doing your violence with a sword or bow and arrow. So what exactly could count as theft? How far do we measure this? Well, stonecutters are not subject to the law of robbery, meaning if they keep the chips, right? If you're chipping off a stone in order to shape it for some use, the person who bought the stone, they bought the whole stone. But when you chip it, parts of that stone are coming off. So who do those chips belong to? And they did have many uses in the ancient world. By default, they were considered to be owned by the stonecutter. That was considered to be built into the transaction of having hired them to do the job. Workers who trim shrubs or cut vines or weed plants or thin vegetables, if the householder cares about the waste, they are subject to the laws of robbery, but if not, then what they cut belongs to them. Some people might want you to leave the extra trimmings and cuttings from your lawn and from the hedges, because maybe they use it for compost, or maybe they use it for fireplace or some other reason. If so, then you have to leave them, right? They are their property. Even though you were paid to cut it, you were not given permission to take it. But if it is with their permission, then you are allowed to take. And that's something that would be usually governed by local custom or by the particular wants of the homeowner. Questions or comments? All right. So we're going to just sort of finish up on a section where we're going to deal about tzedakah. Tzedakah is usually translated into English as charity, but that is a misleading translation. Tzedakah is not charity in the sense of the English word. Charity in the English word has to do with the kindness of your heart that moves you to help someone else in need. Tzedakah in Hebrew comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. And Judaism considers that it is just cause for a person to have a demand upon an individual or community to support them if they are in need. It is not about getting your sympathy. It is about asking you to do your duty as God has asked us to help those in need. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land of the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. So one of the most common forms of giving in the ancient world was to give a loan without interest. But that was mainly because most people didn't have enough to give directly and lose the value, but they could give a loan if they could hope that it would be returned. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would help a foreigner and stranger, so you can continue to live among you, from Leviticus. So from Ketuvot in the Talmud, Rav Ila and Usha sages ordained that he who wants to distribute his possessions may not do so more than with a fifth of them. So if you want to give to the poor, please do so, but don't give more than 20% of your property. So too, it has been taught on Tanaic authority from the Mishnah and earlier, who wants to distribute his possessions may not do so more than a fifth of them, lest he fall into need. Meaning you are not allowed, as some other people around the world do, to give up all of your possessions, which then force other people to have to take care of you, right? You can take care of other people and you can use your considerable property to do so, but you cannot put yourself in a position where you will now need others to take care of you. As we'll see a little bit later on, Judaism believes very strongly that a person should work as hard as they can to avoid needing the support of the community. Taking tzedakah is not something that should be done casually, not just because of pride or embarrassment, but because taking tzedakah means that you are taking it away from other people who could be in more need than you. So what does it actually mean to be needy? Well, Judaism has a measure for this. When a person has enough food for 2 meals, which would be 1 day's worth of food in the classical world, it is forbidden for him to take from the tamchui. The tamchui was the minimum measure that would be needed for getting a person through the day. When he has enough food for 14 meals, meaning a week's worth of food, he should not take from the kuppah, which is the middle level of support, right? That would be given to a broader range of people, not just those who are in immediate need of food today. If he has 200 zuz, even if he does not invest or do business with them, or 50 zuz that he invests, he should not take shichacha, peah, or the tithe for the poor. Right? So if you've got a minimum amount, and this is a moderate amount to live on for a while, especially if it's invested and therefore it's making you money because of the business that you're doing with it, then the forgotten sheave, the corner of the field, and the tithe that is provided from everybody's produce, you are not allowed to take from that. So there are different layers of poor, right? If you are absolutely so poor that you can't eat, then you can take from the food bank would be more like the tamchui. If you have enough to eat, but not enough for the week, then you can take from the kuppah, but not the food bank. And the kuppah hopefully will give you enough to be stable. If you have enough for a week and you have enough for today, of course, but you don't really have a stable amount that you can live on for a long time, then you can go out to the fields and you can collect from the extra things that are being left for the poor. If he has money in hand, but he owes a debt or it is under lien to his wife for her ketubah, he is permitted to take. Meaning, I have 200 zuz, but I owe it to someone else, so it's not really my money. Then yes, I can still go out and be in the field as well. Questions or comments on that measuring? Okay. Continuing the same idea, when a poor person is in need but owns a courtyard and household utensils, even silver and gold utensils, we do not obligate him to sell his house and his personal possessions. Instead, he is permitted to accept charity, meaning tzedakah, and it is a mitzvah to give to him, right? So this is the general rule, that if a person is in need, we don't force them to become homeless before we help them, right? We help them from where they are. When does the above apply? with regard to eating utensils, drinking utensils, clothing, bedding, and the like, meaning the essentials of life, right? If, however, he owns a golden comb or pestle or the like, he should sell them and buy less valuable ones, right? So, okay, fine. If you have something that is very expensive and it's not something that you would use in regular day-to-day life, then yes, you do need to make that concession. You should sell that, replace it with something cheaper, and use the extra money to take care of yourself. But just because you have a golden cup, everybody needs a cup. We're not going to force you to sell your cup to buy another cup. So the essentials you can keep regardless of their quality. The non-essentials you need to downgrade in order that you will be able to have a little extra money. And then it goes on. When does the above apply? Before he has descended to the level where he takes charity from people at large, what would be called begging on the street. Once he collects charity from the community, we obligate him to sell his utensils and purchase lesser ones and then accept charity. So if you're actually going to be going door to door, and if you are going to get charity from the tamhui, and if you are going to go into the food bank, then yes, you do need to sell things. Now, ideally, when a person is in need, is having a hard time, we try to catch them before they fall to that place. We don't want people to hit bottom economically. We want to soften their current crisis so that they can return to being fully self-sufficient. That's why we're not interested in forcing them to sell all of their things. But if they have reached a point where they are now in dire straits, then we can't really let them hold on to all of these valuable items when there are other poor people that don't even have those to support themselves. But we do have to prioritize who we help first based upon how much they can help themselves once it reaches that level. And therefore, they do have to sell their utensils. Now, can they keep their house? Absolutely, right? But their golden cup, that they are going to sell. But the other side, of course, one should always restrain himself and submit to privation rather than be dependent upon other people or cast himself upon public tzedakah. For thus have the sages commanded us, saying, make the Sabbath a weekday rather than be dependent upon other people. Meaning you should even come close to work on Shabbat if it means you can provide for yourself rather than having to rely on others. Even if one is a sage, held in honor, once he becomes impoverished, he should engage in a trade, be it even a loathsome trade, rather than being dependent upon other people. It is better to skin hides off animal carcasses than to say to other people, I am a great sage, I am a priest, sustain me. Right? It doesn't matter how noble you are, it doesn't matter how honored you are, you should not expect others to take care of you if you have the ability to take care of yourself, and it is only your pride that is keeping you from doing it. So did the sages command us. Among the great sages, there were hewers of wood, carriers of beams, drawers of water to irrigate gardens, and workers in iron and charcoal. Those were all very poor professions and very dirty and not high status professions. But they did it, and they did it to support themselves, even while being great sages. They did not ask for public assistance, nor did they accept it when offered to them. This is the benchmark, is that you only accept when you absolutely need and have not been able to provide for yourself using all of your own resources and energy. Then yes, there is no shame in getting that help. That is part of what it means to be a community. But it does mean that you need to be careful before you look for help to make sure that you have actually used everything you can. On the other hand, on the other side, whoever is in need of tzedakah, is not in need of tzedakah, but deceives the public and does accept them, will not die of old age until he indeed becomes dependent upon other people. Meaning, if you cheat others and pretend to be someone who is in need, you pretend to be homeless, pretend to be ill, then eventually, yes, you will end up in a position where you need tzedakah. You may fake it at first, but you will end up in real poverty. He is included among those of whom Scripture says, cursed is the man that trusts in man, meaning somebody who is looking to depend upon others and doesn't recognize that it is God that truly provides. On the other hand, whosoever is in need of tzedakah and cannot survive unless he accepts them, such as a person who is of advanced age or ill or afflicted with sore trials, but is too proud and refuses to accept them, refuses help, is the same as a shedder of blood and is held to account for his own soul. And by his suffering, he gains nothing but sin and guilt. So for a person who says, no, 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 I will not accept, I am too proud, I will never accept help from anyone, I'll just sit here quietly under the bridge and starve myself to death, there is no nobility in that, right? You are not being brave, you are not being strong, you are being an arrogant, stubborn person. If you need help, accept help. No man is ever impoverished by tzedakah, nor does evil or harm befall anyone by reason of it. As it is said, and the work of the righteous shall be peace, from Isaiah. The idea being here that don't worry that if I give tzedakah, remember, not more than 20%, don't worry that by giving tzedakah, you're going to make yourself broke. So there is no reason to fear that by giving tzedakah, you won't have enough. If you are giving reasonably, you will do fine. And indeed, Judaism believes that everyone, even somebody who is poor, should still find opportunities to do tzedakah, to do this for someone else. If a poor person asks you for tzedakah and you have nothing to give him, comfort him with words. It is forbidden to rebuke a poor man or to raise one's voice in a shout at him, seeing that his heart is broken and crushed. As scripture says, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And again, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. Woe to him who shames the poor. Woe to him. One should rather be unto the poor as a father, with both compassion and words. As it is said, I was a father to the needy, meaning from Job. So unfortunately, oftentimes when people are feeling guilted into helping somebody in need or feeling that they don't want to help when they are confronted by someone in need, they will treat them harshly. Sometimes they'll treat them harshly and give nothing. Sometimes they will treat them harshly and still give what they must. But in both cases, they are committing a grave, grave problem, a massive crime against that person. Somebody who is already needy and they are looking for help has already suffered enough. They do not need you to add the humiliation and castigations upon them. It's become far too common in our modern world for people to mock the poor and to shame and humiliate them. And it is one of the least nice aspects of our current society, and one that should be the least necessary, given that we live in a very, very rich country that should be able to support everyone without making anyone feel ashamed. And that is going to finish us for tonight. I'll leave a few minutes for questions or additional comments. Going once, going twice.
Hey, Rabbi, is it possible if you can email me slides from tonight? I'm a little late tonight.
That's okay. If you look, this is for everyone. If you look in the chat, there should be a link for Dropbox. That's the handout.
You're talking about on YouTube?
Well, actually, in the YouTube and the chat in the Zoom.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
If it's not there, email me afterwards, and I'll be happy to send you the PDF. All right. I think that that will do it, unless there are any other questions or comments.
Rabbi, thank you
Yes.
for allowing me to participate, and I wish you safe travels.
Thank you very much. I don't plan to be traveling much in the future, but thank you. My travel just around the sun will be plenty to be safe on.
Well, please be safe.
Thank you. You too as well. And I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. A reminder, we'll have class again after 4 weeks hiatus. Please enjoy the back catalog, and there's lots of other learning opportunities out there.
Hey, take care, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye, Rabbi.